What if everything you were ever taught about human evolution was a carefully constructed lie? What if the textbooks, the museums, the professors standing behind polished lecterns, all of them were repeating a story designed to keep you from asking the one question that could unravel everything? Picture this. It is 1928. A young Peruvian archaeologist named Julio Tello is digging through the sun-scorched desert of the Paracas Peninsula, about 150 miles south of Lima. The sand is relentless, the heat unbearable. His team has been excavating for weeks, finding pottery, textile fragments, the usual remnants of a civilization long gone. But then, on a day that should have been ordinary, someone's shovel strikes something different, something that doesn't belong. They brush away centuries of dust. And there, staring up at them from the ancient earth, is a skull, but not like any skull they have ever seen. Not like any skull that any human being has ever documented. The cranium is elongated, dramatically, impossibly elongated, stretched upward and backward as if someone or something had pulled the top of the head like taffy. The eye sockets are subtly larger than normal. The jawline is heavier. The cranial volume, they will later measure, exceeds that of a standard Homo sapiens by as much as 25%. 25%. Let that number settle in your mind. That is not a minor variation. That is not a quirk of nature. That is a fundamental deviation from what we are told defines our species. And Julio Tello did not find one of these skulls. He found over 300 skulls, all elongated, all buried with extraordinary care, wrapped in elaborate textiles, surrounded by offerings that suggest these individuals were not ordinary members of their society. They were revered, they were feared, they were something else entirely. Now, here is where the story should get interesting. Here's where mainstream archaeology should have launched a global investigation, where geneticists should have scrambled to extract DNA, where the world should have asked the most obvious question imaginable. What were these beings? Instead, what happened? Silence, dismissal. A convenient explanation was manufactured and distributed like a press release. Cranial deformation, they said. Artificial head binding. Ancient cultures would wrap the skulls of infants with boards and cloth, compressing the growing bone into elongated shapes. A cultural practice, nothing more. Case closed. Move along, nothing to see here. And for nearly a century, that explanation held. It held because most people never bothered to look closer. It held because the skulls were locked away in museums with restricted access. It held because asking too many questions about human origins is a very good way to end your academic career. But what if I told you that the explanation doesn't hold? What if I told you that when independent researchers finally got their hands on these skulls, when they finally ran DNA analysis in 2014 and beyond, the results were so disturbing that the lead researcher said, and I quote, "Whatever the result is, it is going to be controversial." What if I told you that these elongated skulls are not unique to Peru, that they have been found on every inhabited continent on Earth? From the royal tombs of ancient Egypt to the steppes of Central Asia, from the islands of Melanesia to the river valleys of France, from the highlands of Africa to the burial mounds of North America, every continent, every major ancient civilization, the same impossible skull shape, the same reverence, the same mystery. Are you ready to confront what that actually means? Because today, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most disturbing secrets in human history. We are going to examine the evidence that mainstream science desperately does not want you to see. And by the end of this journey, you may never look at human history or at yourself the same way again. This is the mystery of the elongated skulls, and it is far more terrifying than you can possibly imagine. Let us begin. To understand why the elongated skulls represent such a seismic threat to the accepted narrative of human history, you first need to understand what mainstream science claims they are. Because the official explanation is so neat, so tidy, so perfectly designed to shut down curiosity that most people accept it without a second thought. And that is exactly the point. The standard archaeological position goes something like this. Many ancient cultures around the world practiced a form of body modification known as artificial cranial deformation. Beginning in infancy, when the skull bones are still soft and pliable, parents or tribal elders would bind the baby's head using wooden boards, tight cloth wraps, or specially designed cradle devices. Over months and years, the constant pressure would reshape the growing skull into an elongated form. The practice is well documented in cultures ranging from the Maya and Inca of the Americas to the Huns of Central Asia, from the Mangbetu people of Central Africa to certain indigenous Australian groups. It was done for reasons of beauty, social status, tribal identification, or religious significance. That is the explanation. Clean, clinical. Case closed, but here's the problem. Here's the crack in the foundation that the entire edifice of conventional wisdom is built upon. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Artificial cranial deformation changes the shape of the skull. It does not, it cannot. It has never been shown to change the volume of the skull. Read that again. When you bind an infant's head, you redistribute the bone growth. You push it in one direction instead of another. But the total cranial capacity, the actual volume inside the skull, remains essentially the same as a normal human skull. Think of it like squeezing a balloon. You can make it longer, you can make it thinner, but the amount of air inside does not change. The Paracas skulls are different. The cranial volume of many of these skulls is up to 25% larger than a typical Homo sapiens skull. Some researchers have measured capacities exceeding 1,600 cubic centimeters, compared to the average human range of 1,200 to 1,400. You cannot achieve that through binding. You cannot achieve that through any known form of artificial modification. That additional volume represents actual additional brain tissue, or at least it represents the space where additional brain tissue once existed. And that is not the only anomaly. Look closer at the Paracas skulls, and you will notice something else that the textbooks conveniently ignore. Many of these skulls possess only 2 parietal plates instead of the normal 3. In a standard human skull, the top of the cranium is formed by 2 parietal bones joined by the sagittal suture, a visible seam running from front to back. Many of the Paracas skulls lack this suture entirely. The cranium is formed from a single, continuous plate of bone. No known form of head binding can eliminate a cranial suture. Sutures are genetically determined structural features of the skull. They are as fundamental to human anatomy as the number of bones in your hand. You are born with them. They are part of the blueprint. And yet, in skull after skull from Paracas, they are simply absent. How do you explain that? How does mainstream archaeology explain that? The answer is that they don't. They simply refuse to address it. They wave their hands and mutter about natural variation and quickly change the subject. Because to address it honestly would mean confronting a possibility so disturbing, so fundamentally destabilizing to everything we think we know, that the entire framework of human evolutionary history would begin to crumble. Brian Forster, a researcher who has spent over a decade studying the Paracas skulls, managed to obtain samples for DNA analysis in 2014. The samples were sent to a geneticist whose identity was initially kept anonymous for reasons that will become obvious. The preliminary results, when they came back, sent shockwaves through the alternative research community. The mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited exclusively through the maternal line, showed mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. Let me repeat that, because the implications are staggering. The DNA contained mutations that have never been seen in any living organism on this planet. Not in Homo sapiens, not in Neanderthals, not in Denisovans, not in any great ape, not in any mammal whatsoever. The geneticists reportedly stated that these individuals were so biologically different that interbreeding with normal humans would have been impossible. If that assessment holds, if the DNA results are confirmed by further analysis, then what we are looking at is not a human cultural practice. We are looking at evidence of a separate species, a species that lived alongside humans, a species that was revered, possibly worshipped, and almost certainly dominated the populations around them. A species that, according to the official record, does not exist. Are you beginning to see why this matters? Are you beginning to understand why this information has been systematically suppressed, ridiculed, and ignored by mainstream academia? Now, before we go further, I want to be transparent about something. The DNA results from 2014 have been questioned by some geneticists who argue that the samples may have been contaminated, that the testing methodology was not rigorous enough, that the results need to be replicated in controlled laboratory conditions. These are fair scientific criticisms. They are the kind of objections that any responsible researcher should raise. But here's what troubles me. Why haven't those controlled studies been done? It has been over a decade since the initial results were published. Over a decade. In that time, we have mapped the genome of Neanderthals from 40,000-year-old bone fragments. We have extracted DNA from a cave in Spain that is 400,000 years old. We have the technology, we have the capability, and yet no major university, no government-funded research institution, no mainstream scientific body has undertaken a comprehensive genetic analysis of the Paracas skulls. Why not? If the elongated skulls are simply the result of head binding, as we are told, then a proper genetic study would confirm that. It would silence the conspiracy theorists once and for all. It would put the matter to rest. The fact that this study has not been done, that no one with institutional power seems interested in doing it, suggests something deeply uncomfortable. Maybe they already know what they would find. Maybe they know that the world is not ready to hear it. Now, let us leave Peru for a moment. Let us travel thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean to the ancient land that has captivated human imagination for millennia. Let us go to Egypt, because if the Paracas skulls were an isolated anomaly, a quirk of one South American culture, you might reasonably argue that they are a curiosity, but not a paradigm-shattering discovery. But they are not isolated, not even close. In the dusty halls of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, behind glass cases that most tourists walk past without a second glance, sit some of the most disturbing artifacts in the history of human civilization. They are the skulls and statues of the Pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, the most powerful ruling family ancient Egypt ever produced. And their heads are elongated. Consider Akhenaten, the pharaoh who, around 130-50 BC, did something unprecedented in Egyptian history. He abolished the traditional polytheistic religion, closed the temples, dismissed the priests, and declared that there was only one god, the Aten, the solar disk. He moved the entire capital of Egypt to a brand new city he built from scratch in the middle of the desert, a city called Amarna. He changed art, religion, politics, everything. And he was depicted consistently with an elongated skull, an impossibly long face, wide hips, a distended belly, and features that look, frankly, inhuman. For decades, Egyptologists have argued about what was wrong with Akhenaten. Marfan syndrome, some suggest. Froehlich syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome, a genetic disorder. An artistic style, a religious statement. Every possible mundane explanation has been proposed, but here's what they cannot explain away. It was not just Akhenaten. His wife, Nefertiti, whose famous bust is one of the most recognizable artifacts in the world, is consistently depicted with an elongated cranium concealed beneath her distinctive, tall crown. Their daughters, all 6 of them, are shown in multiple artworks with dramatically elongated skulls. Not slightly elongated, not suggestively elongated. Dramatically, grotesquely, impossibly elongated. The famous bust of Nefertiti in the Neues Museum in Berlin shows a woman of extraordinary beauty. But look at the shape of the crown. Look at the angle. That crown is not decorative, it is functional. It is designed to conceal or to accommodate a cranial shape that would have been immediately, visibly different from the population around her. And then there is the skull discovered in the tomb known as KV55 in the Valley of the Kings, believed by many scholars to belong to Akhenaten himself. The skull is elongated. The identification has been disputed for over a century, with various researchers attributing it to Smenkhare, Akhenaten, or another member of the royal family. But whoever it belonged to, the elongation is real. It is physical. It is not an artistic convention. Now consider the young king who followed Akhenaten. Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose tomb Howard Carter discovered in 1922 in what remains the most spectacular archaeological find in history. When CT scans were performed on Tutankhamun's mummy in 2005, researchers noted something peculiar about his skull shape. It showed a distinct elongation at the back, a condition sometimes called dolichocephaly. The official explanation, a natural variation, possibly genetic. Nothing unusual. The son of a pharaoh who looked inhuman, from a dynasty where every member was depicted with elongated skulls, in a civilization that existed thousands of years before the Paracas culture in Peru also had an elongated skull. And this is nothing unusual. But let me take you even further back in Egyptian history to something even more disturbing. In the pre-dynastic period, before the first pharaohs, before the pyramids, before recorded Egyptian history even begins, there existed a site called Nabda Playa in the western desert of Egypt. This site contains a stone circle that has been dated to approximately 7,000 years ago, making it roughly 1,000 years older than Stonehenge. The people who built it had sophisticated astronomical knowledge and, according to some researchers, physical characteristics that set them apart from the surrounding populations. And in the earliest Egyptian records, the civilization is said to have been founded by beings called the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. These beings are described in the Turin King List, a papyrus dating to approximately 1279 BC, as divine or semi-divine rulers who governed Egypt for thousands of years before the first human pharaohs. They were the intermediaries between the gods and humanity, They possessed knowledge and abilities far beyond ordinary humans, and in the archaeological record, skulls found in pre-dynastic Egyptian sites show elongation patterns remarkably similar to those found in Paracas. So let me ask you this. What if the elongated skulls of the Egyptian pharaohs were not the result of disease, or artistic convention, or cultural practice? What if they were the physical evidence of a bloodline that traced back not to the earliest human populations of the Nile Valley, but to something else entirely? Something that the ancient Egyptians themselves described as divine. What if the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, were real? What if they were a separate species, or a hybrid species, that ruled over early human civilizations? What if the elongated skull was their distinguishing feature, the mark of their lineage, the physical sign of their connection to whatever they truly were? And what if the same beings, the same bloodline, the same species was simultaneously present in Peru on the other side of the world? How is that possible? How can the same anomalous skull shape appear in two civilizations separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, civilizations that mainstream history insists had absolutely no contact with each other? The answer, if you are willing to hear it, is terrifying. Let us expand the map. Let us look at where else these skulls appear, because the pattern is not limited to Peru and Egypt. It is global, it is universal, and it is inexplicable under any conventional model of human migration and cultural diffusion. In Malta, that tiny island archipelago in the Mediterranean Sea, there exists an underground temple complex called the Hypogeum of House of Lani. Discovered accidentally in 1902 when workers were cutting cisterns for a new housing development, the Hypogeum is carved entirely from solid rock. It extends 3 levels deep underground. It is approximately 5,000 years old, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And it is one of the most extraordinary and least explained structures on Earth. Inside the Hypogeum, archaeologists found the remains of over 7,000 individuals. 7,000 people buried in an underground temple carved from living rock with acoustic properties so precise that a word spoken in the oracle chamber resonates at a frequency of 110 Hz, a frequency that modern neuroscience has shown can shift brain activity from the left hemisphere to the right, effectively inducing altered states of consciousness. An ancient underground temple that manipulates brain chemistry through sound. Think about that for a moment. But here's the detail that matters for our investigation. Among the remains found in the Hypogeum were skulls that were elongated. Some of these skulls were placed on display in the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, Malta. And then, at some point, they were quietly removed from public exhibition. Researchers who have attempted to study them have reported difficulty gaining access. The official position is that the skulls are in storage due to space limitations. One of the most potentially significant archaeological discoveries in Mediterranean history, evidence of elongated skull beings in a 5,000-year-old underground temple with acoustic mind control technology, and it was removed from public view due to space limitations. Do you believe that? Do we look avai? Do you honestly believe that? Now, travel north and east to the Caucasus Mountains, the Great Barrier between Europe and Asia. In the region that is now southern Russia, archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous elongated skulls dating from roughly the 2nd century BC to the 6th century AD. These are typically attributed to the Alans, the Sarmatians, and later the Huns, nomadic peoples who practiced cranial deformation as a marker of elite status. But some of these skulls, particularly those found in the older burial layers, display the same anomalies as the Paracas skulls. larger cranial volume, missing sutures, unusual bone thickness. Features that cannot be explained by binding alone. In Crimea, dozens of elongated skulls have been recovered from ancient burial sites. In 2017, Russian archaeologists discovered a remarkably well-preserved elongated skull in a necropolis near Kerch, dating to approximately the 2nd century AD. The discovery made international headlines, with most news outlets dutifully reporting the standard explanation: artificial cranial deformation. But local researchers who examined the skull noted features inconsistent with simple binding. Move further east to China. In 2019, researchers published a study in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology documenting elongated skulls found at a site called Hypogeum in northeastern China. These skulls were dated to between 5,000 and 12,000 years ago, making them some of the oldest examples of cranial modification ever discovered. The researchers noted that the practice appeared to emerge independently in this region, with no apparent connection to cranial deformation practices elsewhere in the world. Independently, no connection, on the other side of the planet from Peru, thousands of years earlier than previously thought possible. Now, if you are a conventional archaeologist, you explain this through convergent cultural evolution. Different societies independently developed the same practice for similar reasons, just as different cultures independently invented the wheel, or agriculture, or pottery. It is a reasonable argument on the surface, but peel back the surface and the argument collapses under the weight of its own improbability. Because we are not talking about a simple, intuitive invention like a wheel. We are talking about a practice that is painful, dangerous, and serves no obvious practical purpose. Binding an infant's skull risks brain damage, infection, and death. Why would dozens of completely unconnected cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all independently decide to do the same bizarre, dangerous, purposeless thing? Unless it was not purposeless, unless they were imitating something, unless they had seen beings with naturally elongated skulls, beings of power and authority and godlike capability, and they were trying to look like them, trying to claim the power associated with that skull shape, trying to become, in appearance at least, something more than human. This is the cargo cult hypothesis applied to ancient cranial deformation, and it is far more convincing than the mainstream alternative. Think about it this way. After World War II, when American military forces left the islands of Melanesia in the Pacific, the indigenous populations who had witnessed the arrival of planes carrying unimaginable wealth, food, medicine, technology, they did something remarkable. They built replica airplanes out of bamboo and straw. They carved fake headphones from wood. They constructed mock landing strips and control towers. They performed rituals designed to summon the planes back. They were imitating what they had seen. They were trying to recreate the experience of the gods who had arrived from the sky bringing cargo. They did not understand the technology. They did not understand the civilization behind it. But they understood that these beings were powerful, and they tried to become like them. Now apply that same logic to cranial deformation. Ancient humans encountered beings with naturally elongated skulls. These beings possessed knowledge, technology, and power far beyond anything the humans had ever seen. The humans revered them as gods. And when those beings departed, or died, or withdrew, the humans did the only thing they could. They tried to look like them. They bound their children's heads, reshaping their skulls in imitation of the divine form. It was not a cultural practice. It was worship. It was cargo cult behavior replicated across every continent, across every major civilization for thousands of years. And the fact that it occurred everywhere, independently, simultaneously, tells us something terrifying about the beings they were imitating. Those beings were everywhere. They were global. They were present in every corner of the ancient world. Who were they? Where did they come from? And where did they go? To answer those questions, we need to look at what the ancient texts actually say. Not the sanitized versions you find in children's books. Not the carefully curated excerpts that mainstream scholars deem acceptable. The actual texts. The raw, unfiltered words of the ancient world. Because when you read them, really read them without the lens of modern academic prejudice, they tell a story so consistent, so detailed, so eerily similar across completely unconnected cultures that dismissing them as mere mythology becomes an act of willful ignorance. Start with the oldest, the Sumerian king list, a clay tablet inscribed in cuneiform script dating to approximately 2100 BC. It records the rulers of Sumer going back to a time before the flood, and the names and reign lengths it records are staggering. Alulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. Alulea ruled for 36,000 years. Enmen Elue Ene ruled for 43,200 years. These are not metaphorical numbers. They are presented with the same bureaucratic precision as the later, historically verifiable kings whose reigns are measured in normal human lifespans. The Sumerian texts describe these early rulers as connected to the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky and established civilization on Earth. The Anunnaki are described as physically larger than humans, longer lived, possessed of knowledge and technology that humans could not comprehend. They are credited with teaching humanity agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. And they are depicted in numerous Sumerian cylinder seal impressions as physically distinct from the humans around them, often shown as significantly taller, with elongated cranial features. Zecharia Sitchin, the controversial scholar who spent decades translating and interpreting Sumerian texts, argued that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru, who genetically engineered Homo sapiens as a slave species to mine gold for their own purposes. His translations have been vigorously disputed by mainstream Assyriologists, and there's legitimate scholarly debate about the accuracy of his interpretations. But regardless of whether you accept Sitchin's specific claims, the underlying textual evidence is real. The Sumerians did describe beings from elsewhere who created or modified humanity. That is, in the texts. You can read the translations yourself. Multiple scholars, not just Sitchin, have noted these elements. Now cross the world to Mesoamerica. The Popol Vuh, the creation narrative of the Quiché Maya, describes how the gods created humanity through multiple attempts, each time destroying their failed creations and trying again. The final, successful creation, us, was deliberately limited by the gods. The text says, and this is a direct quote from Dennis Tedlock's translation, "They were blinded as the face of a mirror is breathed upon." Their vision flickered. Now it was only from close-up that they could see what was there with any clarity. The gods intentionally reduced human perception because humanity's original capabilities made the gods uneasy. We could see too much, know too much. We were too close to what the gods themselves were. Does that sound like mythology to you? Or does it sound like a genetic modification report? The Hindu texts are perhaps the most explicit of all, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Epic poems dating to approximately the first millennium BC, but describing events said to have occurred thousands of years earlier, contain descriptions of beings and technologies that read like science fiction. The Devas and Asuras, often translated as gods and demons, are described as physically distinct from humans, possessed of aerial vehicles called vimanas, weapons of mass destruction called astras, and the ability to manipulate genetics to create hybrid beings. The Bhagavata Purana describes the Nagas, serpentine beings with elongated heads who lived in underground cities and possessed advanced technology. The Nagas intermarried with human royal families, producing hybrid dynasties that ruled over human populations. These hybrid rulers were depicted with elongated cranial features, distinguishing them from the ordinary humans they governed. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis chapter 6 describes the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God, who mated with human women. These Nephilim were giants, mighty beings, men of renown. The Book of Enoch, which was part of the Ethiopian biblical canon and was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, provides far more detail. It describes 200 beings called Watchers who descended to Earth, took human wives, and produced hybrid offspring. These Watchers taught humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, astrology, cosmetics, weaponry, and what the text calls the cutting of roots, which many interpreters believe refers to medicine or possibly genetic manipulation. The Watchers are described as physically different from humans, taller, more luminous, with features that set them apart, and their hybrid children, the Nephilim, were not fully human. They were something in between, something that should not have existed. Now here's the connection that will chill you to the bone. In every single one of these textual traditions, across Sumer, Mesoamerica, India, and the Near East, the beings who interact with humanity share certain characteristics. They come from elsewhere. They are physically distinct from humans, often taller, often with elongated cranial features. They possess technology far beyond human capability. They modify or create humans for their own purposes. They interbreed with humans, producing hybrid ruling classes, and they eventually withdraw, leaving behind confused, diminished human populations who worship them as gods and try to imitate their physical appearance. The elongated skulls are the physical evidence of this narrative. They are the archaeological fingerprint of the hybrid ruling classes described in every ancient tradition on Earth. They are the proof that the myths are not myths at all, and mainstream science refuses to investigate. Let us now confront the darkest implication of all this evidence. Let us talk about what these beings actually did with humanity, because if the ancient texts are to be taken seriously, even partially, the picture that emerges is not one of benevolent gods nurturing their creation. It is something far more disturbing. The Sumerian creation texts, particularly the Atrahasis in the Enuma Elish, describe the creation of humanity in explicitly utilitarian terms. The lesser gods, the Iji, were laboring in mines and fields, and they rebelled against the hard work. In response, the chief god Enlil, along with the mother goddess Ninhursag and the clever god Enki, decided to create a new being to take over the labor. They mixed the blood of a slaughtered god with clay and created Lolu, the savage or primitive worker. Humanity. We were created to work. We were designed as a labor force. The texts are not ambiguous about this. They do not dress it up in spiritual language. They describe a species engineered for servitude. And then the engineering continued. The text describes subsequent modifications, upgrades, if you will, to the human design. Fertility was added so that the workforce could reproduce itself. Intelligence was calibrated, enough to follow instructions but not enough to challenge the creators. Lifespan was limited. In the early texts, humans lived for thousands of years. After the flood, lifespans were drastically reduced. Why? Because long-lived humans were harder to control. They accumulated too much knowledge. They became too capable. They started asking questions. Does any of this sound familiar? Does it remind you of anything you see in the world today? Think about the elongated skull beings in this context. They were not simply another human culture. They were the administrators, the overseers, the middle management of a system designed to keep humanity productive and obedient. They were the hybrid ruling class, possessing enough of the creator's genetics to wield authority, but enough human DNA to interface with the labor force. Every ancient civilization with elongated skull rulers shares certain characteristics: rigid social hierarchies, massive construction projects requiring enormous labor forces, sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that seems to appear fully formed, without any developmental period, and a religious system centered on beings who came from the sky and would one day return. In Peru, the Paracas culture preceded the Nazca civilization, which created the famous Nazca lines, enormous geoglyphs visible only from the air. Why would a ground-dwelling civilization create artwork that can only be properly viewed from altitude, unless they were creating it for someone who could view it from altitude? Someone who flew, someone who came from above. In Egypt, the earliest dynasties display a level of architectural, mathematical, and astronomical knowledge that is staggering. The Great Pyramid of Giza, supposedly built during the reign of Khufu around 260 BC, is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. Its base is level to within less than 1 inch across a footprint of over 13 acres. Its internal geometry encodes the mathematical constant pi and the dimensions of the Earth. And we are told it was built by copper tools and brute force. In Malta, the megalithic temples predate the pyramids by over 1,000 years. The Hypogeum extends 3 stories underground, carved from solid limestone with tools that have never been identified. The acoustic properties suggest a sophisticated understanding of sound engineering that we have only recently begun to comprehend. All of these civilizations had elongated skull rulers. All of them displayed knowledge and capabilities that seem impossible for their supposed level of technological development. All of them told stories of beings from elsewhere who established civilization and then departed. The pattern is not coincidental. It is a program, a system, a plan that was implemented globally, simultaneously by beings who had the capability to operate on a planetary scale. And here's the question that keeps me awake at night. If these beings created a global system of control, with hybrid administrators managing human labor populations, what happened to that system? Did it end? Did they lose interest? Did they leave? Or did they simply change the way they operate? Did the control become more subtle? Did the hybrid bloodlines continue, hidden behind the facades of royalty, aristocracy, and eventually corporate power? Is the system still running right now all around us, so deeply embedded in the fabric of civilization that we cannot even perceive it? Consider this. In 2017, the United States Department of Defense officially acknowledged the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a secret government project that studied unidentified aerial phenomena. In 2020, the Pentagon released 3 videos of unexplained aerial objects captured by Navy pilots. In 2023, David Grush, a former intelligence official, testified before Congress that the U.S. government possesses non-human craft and biological specimens of their operators. They are acknowledging, slowly, carefully, in measured doses, that we are not alone, that non-human intelligence is real, that it has been interacting with humanity. But we already knew that. The ancient texts told us thousands of years ago. The elongated skulls proved it. The evidence has been there all along. We just were not allowed to see it. Let us return to the skulls themselves for a moment, because there are physical details we have not yet discussed, details that deepen the mystery even further. In 2018, a team of researchers working with Brian Forster conducted a comprehensive analysis of several Paracas skulls using advanced imaging technology. They documented something that had been noted before, but never properly publicized. Several of the skulls contained two small holes, perfectly circular, located near the top of the cranium. These holes were not the result of damage or deterioration. They were too regular, too precisely placed, too cleanly drilled. What were they? Some researchers have suggested trepanation, the ancient surgical practice of drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure, treat headaches, or, in some interpretations, release evil spirits. Trepanation is well documented in ancient Peru and elsewhere, but the trepanation holes found in normal human skulls are irregular, rough-edged, clearly made by hand with primitive tools. The holes in the Paracas elongated skulls are different. They are precise. They are uniform. They suggest a level of surgical capability that should not have existed. Were these beings performing medical procedures on themselves using techniques far beyond what the surrounding human populations possessed? Were the holes functional, serving some purpose related to their different neurology? Were they interfaces of some kind? Physical connections to technology we do not understand? And then there is the matter of the hair. Several of the Paracas skulls were found with hair still attached. This is not unusual in the arid climate of coastal Peru, where mummification occurs naturally due to the dry conditions. But the hair color is unusual. Many of the elongated skull individuals had reddish or reddish-brown hair. Some had hair that appeared almost blonde. The indigenous population of pre-Columbian Peru had universally black hair. There are no exceptions in the archaeological or historical record. Black hair is a dominant genetic trait in all Native American populations. To find reddish hair on individuals in ancient Peru is, from a genetic standpoint, extraordinary. Where did the red hair come from? What population carried those genes? It was not a population that mainstream history acknowledges ever existed in South America before European contact. Interestingly, red and blonde hair shows up in the anomalous burial traditions of multiple ancient sites around the world. The red-haired giants of Lovelock Cave in Nevada are a famous, if controversial, example. Sidica, the Paiute name for these beings, translates to tool eaters, and Paiute oral tradition describes them as a race of red-haired cannibals who terrorized the indigenous population before being trapped in a cave and burned to death. When the cave was excavated in 1911, red-haired human remains were indeed found, along with artifacts suggesting a culture distinct from the surrounding Paiute population. In the Canary Islands, the Guanche people, the indigenous pre-Spanish population, included individuals with blonde and red hair, light skin, and elongated skulls. The Guanches mummified their dead in a manner remarkably similar to Egyptian practices. Their language, what little survives, has been linked by some researchers to Berber languages, but the connection is tenuous. Their origin is one of the great unsolved mysteries of Mediterranean archaeology. Red hair, elongated skulls, unknown genetic origins, advanced cultural practices that do not match the surrounding populations. The same pattern repeated across continents and millennia. This is not convergent evolution. This is not coincidence. This is a population, a species, a bloodline that was present globally in the ancient world. They ruled, they built, they modified the humans around them, and then it disappeared, leaving behind only their bones, their buildings, and the distorted skulls of the humans who tried to look like them. Now, I want to take you somewhere unexpected. I want to take you to the Vatican. In the deepest vaults of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known as the Vatican Secret Archives until the name was changed in 2019, presumably because the word secret was generating too much unwanted curiosity. There are estimated to be over 53 miles of shelving containing documents spanning 2,000 years of history. Access is extremely restricted. Researchers must apply for permission, demonstrate scholarly credentials, and specify exactly which documents they wish to examine. Browsing is not permitted. What is in there? We know some of what is in there because select documents have been released over the centuries. Letters from monarchs, papal bulls, records of inquisitions, diplomatic correspondence, but vast sections remain closed. Entire categories of documents have never been examined by outside scholars. Multiple researchers have claimed that the Vatican possesses documents relating to elongated skull beings, to non-human intelligences, and to the true origins of Christianity. These claims are, by their nature, difficult to verify. But consider the Vatican's behavior, not its words, its behavior, and ask yourself whether it is consistent with an institution that has nothing to hide. The Vatican has its own astronomical observatory, the Vatican Observatory, established in 1891 and currently operating a telescope in Arizona called the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. Its nickname, incredibly, is LUFER, an acronym for Large Binocular Telescope Near-Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. The Vatican, the institution that is supposed to be centered on theology and faith, operates one of the most advanced astronomical research facilities in the world, using a telescope whose acronym spells out the name of the devil. In 2010, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, then director of the Vatican Observatory, gave an interview to the Vatican newspaper L'Osservatore Romano, in which he stated that believing in extraterrestrial life does not contradict faith in God. Just as there is a multiplicity of creatures on Earth, he said, there could be other beings, also intelligent, created by God. He went on to say that aliens could even be free from original sin. Why is the Vatican preparing its flock for the revelation of extraterrestrial life? Why does it have an advanced astronomical observatory? What does it know? And what does it know about the elongated skulls? There are persistent rumors, unverified but repeatedly circulated by researchers who have attempted to access Vatican archives, that the Church possesses elongated skulls recovered from early Christian sites in the Near East, that it possesses texts describing the beings these skulls belong to, that it has known for centuries that humanity is not alone, that our history is not what we are told, and that the truth is so destabilizing to the foundations of organized religion that it must never be revealed. I cannot prove these claims. I am not going to stand here and tell you that I have seen the Vatican's secret elongated skull collection. But I can point to the pattern, the same pattern we see everywhere. Evidence that surfaces briefly, then disappears. Questions that are raised, then silenced. Institutions that behave as though they are protecting a secret so enormous that its revelation would change everything. Let me bring all of this together now, because I know that the sheer volume of evidence, the number of locations, the range of cultures, the span of time, it can be overwhelming. It can feel like a chaotic jumble of disconnected facts, but it is not disconnected. There is a through line. There is a narrative. And when you see it clearly, it is the most terrifying story ever told. Here's what the evidence suggests, taken as a whole. At some point in the deep past, beings who were not Homo sapiens were present on Earth. They may have come from elsewhere. They may have evolved here alongside us, in parallel, from a common ancestor that diverged far earlier than current models suggest. The origin is uncertain, but their presence is documented in the archaeological record, in the genetic record, in the textual record, and in the mythological traditions of every major civilization on every continent. These beings were physically distinct from humans. They were taller. They had elongated skulls with greater cranial volume. They possessed knowledge and technology far beyond the human populations around them. They established themselves as rulers, as gods, as the founding figures of civilization. They interacted with humans genetically, whether through deliberate genetic engineering, as the Sumerian texts suggest, or through interbreeding, as the biblical and Enochian texts describe. They produced hybrid offspring. These hybrids formed the ruling classes of ancient civilizations. They were the pharaohs, the priest kings, the divine rulers. They were distinguished by their elongated skulls, a physical trait inherited from their non-human parent line. The human populations who lived under their rule revered them. When these beings departed, or when the hybrid bloodlines thinned through successive generations of interbreeding with the general population, the humans tried to preserve the divine mark. They bound their children's heads, reshaping their skulls to imitate the gods who had once walked among them. This practice spread across the globe, not through cultural diffusion, but because the same beings had been present everywhere, and the same imitative behavior occurred independently in every population that had encountered them. Over time, the elongated skull tradition faded. The hybrid bloodlines became indistinguishable from the general population. The gods became myths. The myths became fairy tales. And the skulls, the physical evidence of everything, were buried, forgotten, or locked away by institutions that understood their significance and were terrified of its implications. That is the story the elongated skulls tell. That is the secret that mainstream archaeology, mainstream genetics, and mainstream religion have conspired to hide. Not through a grand, coordinated conspiracy, but through something more insidious, a collective refusal to ask the obvious questions, a systemic cowardice masquerading as scientific rigor, a determination to protect the existing narrative at all costs, even at the cost of truth. And here is the most disturbing part, the most terrifying implication of all. If these beings were here once, they may still be here. The hybrid bloodlines did not necessarily disappear. They may have simply gone underground, metaphorically speaking. They may have continued to pass their genes through elite families, royal houses, ruling classes across millennia. The elongated skulls may have been bred out, but the other traits, the intelligence, the ambition, the instinct to rule, those may persist. Look at the world around you. Look at the concentration of power in the hands of an extraordinarily small number of families and institutions. Look at the way these families intermarry, generation after generation, preserving their bloodlines with an obsessiveness that goes far beyond mere snobbery. Look at the way information is controlled, history is curated, and questions are suppressed. Is this the natural order of human society? Or is it the continuation of a system that was designed from the very beginning to keep us productive and obedient? I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm not going to stand here and declare with certainty that we are living in a matrix of control designed by non-human intelligences thousands of years ago. That would be irresponsible. That would be the kind of unfounded claim that gives legitimate alternative research a bad name. But I am going to tell you this. The evidence exists. The skulls are real. The DNA results are real. The ancient texts are real. The global pattern is real. And the refusal of mainstream institutions to investigate this evidence honestly and thoroughly is real. Something is being hidden, something enormous, something that would change everything. And with every passing year, with every new discovery, with every government disclosure about unidentified aerial phenomena, with every advance in genetic technology that makes comprehensive DNA analysis cheaper and more accessible, the truth gets harder to suppress. They are running out of places to hide it, and we are running out of patience. With UAP hearings now happening in the United States Congress, with former intelligence officials testifying under oath that non-human intelligences are real, with the Pentagon admitting that objects demonstrating technology far beyond our capabilities are regularly observed in our skies, we are approaching a moment of reckoning. The elongated skulls are part of this reckoning. They are the archaeological component of a disclosure that is happening, whether the authorities want it to or not. Every skull that is DNA tested, every ancient text that is re-examined without academic prejudice, every archaeological site that is investigated with open eyes and open minds brings us closer to the truth. And the truth, whatever it turns out to be, is going to be extraordinary. It is going to rewrite textbooks. It is going to topple institutions. It is going to force humanity to confront questions about our origins, our purpose, and our place in the cosmos that we have been avoiding for our entire existence as a species. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to learn that we might not be the masters of our own planet? That we might be the creation, the experiment, the project of beings we barely remember? I honestly do not know if we are ready. But I know that we cannot hide from it much longer. The evidence is too overwhelming. The questions are too loud. The skulls are staring at us from behind museum glass, silently demanding that we acknowledge what they represent. The journey we have taken today, from the deserts of Peru to the tombs of Egypt, from the underground temples of Malta to the vast steppes of Central Asia, from the cuneiform tablets of Sumer to the sacred texts of India, from the caves of Nevada to the archives of the Vatican. This journey has only scratched the surface. There are elongated skulls that have never been publicly displayed. There are DNA results that have never been published. There are ancient texts that have never been translated. There are sites that have never been excavated. The full picture is still emerging, and every year, every month, new pieces of the puzzle come to light. What matters is that we keep asking the questions. What matters is that we refuse to accept the comfortable lies. What matters is that we look at the evidence with clear eyes and open minds, and we follow it wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the destination. Because the elongated skulls are not just archaeological curiosities. They are not just the remnants of a strange cultural practice. They are the physical evidence of a chapter in human history that has been deliberately erased. They are proof that we have been visited, modified, ruled, and possibly created by beings who are not us. And if you have stayed with me this far, if you have followed this evidence through all its twists and turns and terrifying implications, then you already know somewhere deep inside you that this is real. You feel it. That nagging sense that something about the story we have been told does not add up. That feeling that there are things happening beyond the edges of our perception. That suspicion that the truth is bigger, stranger, and more frightening than anything we have been permitted to imagine. Trust that feeling. It is the most human thing about you, the desire to know, the refusal to be lied to, the insistence on truth, no matter the cost. Today's journey ends here, but the questions, they will stay with you. They will echo in your mind when you look at the stars. They will whisper to you when you visit a museum and see an ancient skull behind glass. They will keep you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering. Who were they? Where did they come from? Are they still here? And what do they want with us? If this video made you think, if it made you question even one thing you thought you knew, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, not for the algorithm, although that helps, but as a signal that there are people out there who want the truth, who are not satisfied with the sanitized, pre-approved version of history, who are willing to look into the darkness and demand answers. Share this with someone who needs to see it, someone who is curious, someone who feels that same nagging sense that we are not being told the whole story. The more people who see this evidence, the harder it becomes to suppress. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because next time, we are going even deeper. We are going to examine the physical sites, the megalithic structures, the impossible architecture that these elongated skull beings left behind. We are going to look at evidence that will make today's revelation seem tame by comparison. And leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Do the elongated skulls represent a lost human culture, a separate species, evidence of extraterrestrial contact? Or something else entirely, something we have not even considered yet? I read every comment. I want to hear your theories, your evidence, your questions. This is not a one-way conversation. We are in this together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to question. Thank you for keeping your mind open. Because in a world that rewards conformity and punishes curiosity, an open mind is the most radical, the most dangerous, and the most necessary thing you can possess. The truth is out there. It is buried in desert sand and locked in museum vaults. It is encoded in ancient texts and written in ancient bones. And it is waiting, patient, silent, eternal, for those who are brave enough to find it. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. Stay hungry for the truth. I will see you next time. And until then, keep looking up, because they might be looking back. No need saying I hears a name till is end of the parade of Velop. And here the banjo, them you do see the nag in the marching bit you Chelsea Day and Discovery. Ancient Mysteries. The forbidden truth behind 300 elongated skulls found in Peru in 1928. Ancient Mysteries, what DNA analysis of 5,000-year-old elongated skulls revealed in 2014. Descriminson, the forbidden truth behind 300 elongated skulls found in Peru in 1928 remains one of the most suppressed chapters in archaeological history. When Julio Tello unearthed over 300 dramatically elongated skulls in the Paracas desert, he uncovered evidence that mainstream science has struggled to explain for nearly a century. These ancient elongated skulls display cranial volumes up to 25% larger than normal human skulls, missing cranial sutures, and DNA mutations found in no known species on Earth. This documentary investigation traces the global pattern of elongated skulls from Peru to ancient Egypt, Malta, Central Asia, and China. We examine the controversial 2014 DNA analysis, the physical anomalies that artificial cranial deformation cannot explain, and the disturbing connections to Sumerian Anunnaki texts, Egyptian pharaonic bloodlines, and biblical Nephilim accounts. The evidence suggests these skulls may belong to a non-human or hybrid species that once ruled ancient civilizations worldwide. Explore the archaeological discoveries, forbidden history, and hidden evidence that connects elongated skulls to unexplained ancient technology, lost civilizations, and the ongoing UAP disclosure. From the Paracas Desert to the Vatican archives, this investigation follows the evidence wherever it leads. And elongated skulls, Paracas skulls, ancient mystery, lost civilization, ancient history, forbidden history, archaeological discovery, elongated skulls DNA, Anunnaki, ancient aliens, cranial deformation, Nephilim, ancient Egypt pharaohs, unexplained archaeology, hidden history. Eerste Reddingeboog, Sonnenvissery Bloodline Skull Date, Paracas Skull Date, Archaeology, Lost Civilization, Ancient Aliens, Sin 4. Thumbnail prompts, Walk thumbnail prompts. Thumbnail is ultra realistic cinematic photograph, IMAX scale, 8K render, Unreal Engine 5 style. A colossal ancient stone temple interior stretching into dark infinity, massive carved pillars rising 50 feet high on both sides. In the center foreground on a stone altar sits a single dramatically elongated skull glowing with faint amber light. A tiny human silhouette stands far behind the skull for scale reference, dwarfed by the monumental architecture. Wide-angle 14mm lens creating extreme depth perspective, volumetric light rays streaming diagonally through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating dust particles and the skull. Atmospheric fog filling the lower portion of the frame. Color palette of deep blacks, warm amber, and cold stone gray. High contrast dramatic shadows. Overwhelming sense of scale and forbidden discovery. Thumbnail, Burrell, ultra-realistic cinematic photograph, IMAX scale, 8K render, Unreal Engine 5 style. Aerial wide-angle view looking down into a massive circular archaeological excavation pit carved into desert terrain. Dozens of elongated skulls arranged in concentric rings are partially exposed in the sandy floor of the pit, each skull dramatically stretched and alien in proportion. A single archaeologist silhouette kneels at the edge of the pit, tiny against the enormous scale of the discovery. Desert landscape stretches to distant mountains under a stormy twilight sky with dark purple and amber clouds. Volumetric light breaking through storm clouds, creating dramatic god rays illuminating the skull arrangement. Strong foreground, midground, background, depth layering. Monumental, overwhelming discovery atmosphere. Embedded prominently in the center of the carved wall is an enormous elongated skull relief sculpture, 30 feet tall. its empty eye sockets casting deep black shadows. Two tiny human figures stand at the base of the wall looking up, completely dwarfed by the skull carving and temple scale. Wide-angle 16mm lens, perspective, creating vertigo-inducing upward composition. Late afternoon golden Egyptian light raking across the carved surface, creating extreme texture and shadow depth. Atmospheric desert haze in background. Volumetric warm light particles suspended in air. Sense of ancient forbidden knowledge in overwhelming monumental scale.